from Europe. After the Second World War, the member states of Europe and the states of the international society all over the globe, they came together to form a universal declaration of human rights. Much needed at the time, since we just saw the results of not having any global rights declaration. So what they did in 1945, 46, 47, etc., when Germany and most of Europe was in ruins, they came together, they formed a treaty. This treaty is called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a really important part of the UN. And in this treaty, there's an Article 14, which is the rights to asylum. This article, number 14, is not binding for the member states, but there was this other document, which is called the Geneva Convention, or the Refugee Convention, or the State of Declaration of Refugees, from 1951. And there, the member states who signed that document, that act, promised each other, in the future, if a citizen, wherever, whenever, needs protection, he or her can always seek protection in another country. So this is the basics. You always have the right to seek protection in another country, as long as you leave your country. And the breathing space, you can call it a breathing space, but the reason I call it a breathing space is that is the very same word that the Swedish leader, Stefan Löfven, the Social Democrat, he chose that word to describe, in November 2015, the 24th of November, he chose that word to describe what Sweden needed at that time, a breathing space. That's how he said. And a breathing space, of course, is what people need when they seek international protection as well. They need a breathing space, they need space to survive. So they leave the country, they leave everything they have ever known to reach another country to seek protection, to seek a breathing space. And these different types of breathing space, the Swedish and somewhat European need of breathing space for the societies, for the schools, for the healthcare, etc. That's one. And another breathing space of apparent conflict to this is the individual and the individual's needs of breathing space, of somewhere to be, of somewhere to survive. And these two perspectives collided during the fall of 2015 and created a unique situation in Europe, but not only in Europe, I should say. But since we are in Europe and in Sweden, this is our main focus in this question. But what is really important to remember is that outside of Europe, there's a situation who's been there for a while, and there's no solution to this situation. In Europe, things have been done to minimize the number of asylum applications handed in, the number of people coming here, in Sweden as well. But the situation where individuals are in need of protection is nowhere near to be drawn to a solution, because people are still in Turkey, people are still in Libya, people are still in Iraq, in Syria, in different countries close to the European borders, but they don't come here as often anymore. And there are reasons for that. But I'll come to that later. First, this is the 3 layers of law. The Convention relating to the status of refugees, as mentioned, from 1951, implemented in Sweden, as most of the countries, in 1954. There is European law that binds the member states as well within the Union. And the European law states that Even if you are not a refugee by law, you can be in need of protection anyhow. For example, if you come from a situation which is war, but you don't have any individual asylum reasons, maybe you are not persecuted because of your sexuality or because of your ethnicity or because of your nationality, but you can still be in need of protection. So there's this thing they call subsidiary protection. You are still a refugee, you are still in need of international protection, but not by the Geneva Convention, not by the Refugee Convention, but by European law. And Sweden has to follow this, as well as the other member states. So these are the two most important layers. And then there's national law. Any country is allowed to have more generous asylum legislation than this. You can give more people protection if you want, because you're an own country. You can decide what will happen within your borders. It's allowed. It's still allowed, I should say. Because within the Common European Asylum System, the CEAS, there are discussions right now, and further on there will be discussions, probably for many years, because they want to reach a common European asylum system. There is already a common European asylum system, but there are variations within Europe. And we saw that during the fall of 2015, where there are variations, people will go in with various intensity to different countries. To Sweden, many people came, as well as to Germany, to France, etc. Not that many came to Finland, not that many came to Poland, etc. So one thing about the common European asylum system is that a good effect on that, if we would really have it, would be that the reasons for people perhaps to travel to different countries within Europe would be minimized, because there would be the exact same rules in all the different countries. There can of course be other reasons for people to travel, to choose a country within Europe, if they want to, but this is a large reason for people to choose a country. Because if you have been in lack of human rights in your home country, maybe in the country next to your home country, maybe during many years, of course you would like to be in that country that gives you the best human rights, or the human rights that is closest to what is written in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if you have been living in Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Nigeria, etc., and if you have been in uncertainty and in danger for so long time, you probably would like to go to a country who would give you a permanent residence, prior to a country which give you a temporary residence, for example. So there are good reasons to work for a common European asylum system. But there are also less good reasons. For example, within Europe, different countries have different leaders during different times, and these leaders does not always work together. They do not always think the same things. And today in Europe, we have, again, a West and an East in some way. And I will return to that, but I would say already that there's a danger when you try to cooperate and when you try to get a common legal act, because you will have to find a way in which everybody can agree. And if there's some countries that doesn't like to have refugees there, and if there's some leaders that are talking about refugees as threats for the national security, threats for the national identity, threats for the national religion. If those type of countries are in that cooperation, the risk is that you tend to find a legislation that gives less human rights just to be able to cooperate, just to be able to find a common legal act. And that is a large risk, but we will get back to that. It looks really formal, and it is. These are the 5 legal acts that is the common European asylum system of today. There is the Asylum Procedure Directive, which is the quality of the decisions, how the decisions are being made, the individual's right to appeal, etc. The Reception Conditions Directive, how we treat people when they are in Europe as asylum seekers, when to hold people in detention centers, etc. The Qualification Directive, these are the rules for the actual protection. Who is a refugee, who is going to have a subsidiary protection, etc. And then there is the Dublin regulation and the Eurodac regulation. And those 2 last regulations regulates which member state is responsible for the individual, which member state will have the responsibility to try that asylum application. Because as you may or may have not noticed, in 2015 especially, people went through Europe, starting in Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, Hungary, Austria, Germany. Maybe they stayed in Germany, maybe they went further to Sweden in some cases. And the thing about 2015 is Serbia didn't want that much people there. Hungary sure didn't want that much people there. And as time flew by in the fall of 2015, Austria didn't want people there either, etc. So the states on the way didn't want them there, and the refugees themselves, in many cases, didn't want to stay there either. So there was a type of win-win situation between the individual and the state you passed through. And there is this system that regulates, at the same time there is this system that regulates that the first member state you come to and hand in your application in is the member state that becomes responsible for your application. So you just don't hand in your application. And the member state didn't make that many controls of you because they didn't want you to hand in your application. So they came to Germany, to France, to Sweden, etc. And this is not a good way, because some member states don't have that many refugees then, and other member states have a lot of refugees, and this is one of the reasons to have a common European asylum system. So what happened? 1,255,640 first-time applicants happened. This is 2015. And the reason why I'm focusing on 2015 is this is the very year where we went from respecting human rights in this matter to try to avoid respecting human rights in this matter, to try to minimize the rights for the very individual who is in need of protection. So this is really the turning point. And for some weeks, during the fall of 2015, at the end of August, in the beginning of September, there was this refugee-friendly, warm, open Europe, where citizens, where NGOs, etc., all of them, and quite loudly, and politicians as well, welcomed people who were on the who sought protection in Europe. And by that, it seemed that what was then happening could be some kind of turning point for a more humane asylum politics, for a more generous asylum politics. But it became the very opposite. it became a turning point for the worse, if you want, for the individuals who sought protection. And I don't think there's a single country in Europe, a single member state, that hasn't changed its asylum procedure to the worse for the individual. And there it is again, the question of who is entitled to the breathing space more. The society and the way we want a wealthy Western society to work, or the individual who is in need of protection. The answer from the member states, as well as from Sweden during 2015 and the time after, is very clear. We want our breathing space. We don't want to change our society, not in any radical way at least. And this has formed the asylum policies since then. The 3rd September of 2015, I would say, marked the very turn point for this. Because prior to that, there was some kind of unity within the EU, and there were not that many people in the western parts, at least, of the Union. But there were a lot of people already, and there were a lot of people in Serbia, there were a lot of people in Hungary, there were a lot of people on the way, but it hasn't quite by then reached Germany or Sweden yet. So what happened the 3rd of September 2015 was, there was this meeting in Brussels where all the European leaders attended, and Viktor, the Prime Minister of Hungary, went there, and he was very clear. And when he was very clear, it became obvious that there is no unity around this question. He said, this is not a Hungarian problem, this is not an European problem, it's a Western problem, it's a German problem, it's a Swedish problem. And he also said, which cannot be misinterpreted, he said, please don't come. He turned to the individuals on the way and said, please don't come. So by then, the 3rd of September, it became obvious that there is no unity around this question, and we have a long way to wander before we can have a common European asylum system in practice, a real common European asylum system. And Hungary is not the only country since then. We talk about the Visegrad countries. It's Poland, it's not Czechoslovakia, I'm sorry. It's Hungary, Slovakia, and another country, which I don't remember at the moment. So there is no unity, and to reach unity, I fear that the Western countries will have to give up some of their policies around this question and to lower their standards. And when they lower their standards, it means that the standards for individuals coming here to seek protection will be lowered. And that is not a good thing. And then there is the quotas. Because during this time and the years before that, there were a lot of people coming to Greece, coming to Italy. And Greece and Italy doesn't have that good of a system to host refugees. So there were this binding resolution, actually. I think it's the first time where some member states has to force upon other member states to take refugees upon them. So there was this binding resolution during this summer and fall where they say within the EU they decided we must all host refugees from a quota. We must all receive refugees from a quota where they are being distributed from Italy, from Greece to other member states, because it's a non-proportional. There are too many in Italy and Greece in relation to other member states, and in relation to the capacity of the system. And I think there were 160,000 individuals were going to be misplaced or distributed within Europe, was going to be moved within Europe. And as of today, I think it's about 5,000 or something that has been actually moved within Europe. So this doesn't work either. And some of the member states actually tried to sue the union because of this. I think it was Slovakia. And as of now, the union is suing them instead because of their refusal to take on further individuals, further refugees. So there is this problem within the union that the very fundament of the union is about cooperation and it's about common values. That's why those stars are there. They represent the common values of Europe. But when it came to people seeking protection, there were no common values as it happened during the fall 2015 and after. So this problem will live on. And this problem is a real problem, because the risk is that the member states who has a vision of a humane asylum system or a generous one, they will be defeated in this, because they can want this as much as whatever, but as soon as there are countries who refuses on this matter, there will be no unity. And if there's no unity, there's no legislation, there's no legal acts, because the European Union is about unity, and there has to be unity when they implement or when they make new legal acts. So this is a real problem, and I don't think that they expected this to be such a problem. But then again, countries change their leaders, and sometimes at the wrong time there come leaders who wants a whole other thing. And that is actually what has happened in Hungary since 2010 and in Poland since 2015, I think. So a binding common European asylum system for the future, I would say it's not nearby. What it would mean is that the legal acts would be floor as well as roof, which means you can't be more generous than that, but at the same time they guarantee the refugees some kind of protection and some kind of individual rights. And these legal acts, I should say, this is the floor. In these legal acts, there are rules for what all the member states has to give to the individuals. You can't go below this. Many member states are trying to go below this, or tried since 2015 to go below this, but they must respect European law. So this is the floor. But if you would have like a binding common European asylum system, as of the talks right now in Europe, they are trying to find a way to get the binding system for floor as well as roof, which means you can't go further than this, but you can't go below it neither. And the reason is the thing I mentioned before. You don't want a situation where it's better to go to some European countries than others. You want a common system. And if a common system could work, I think it has a lot of positive effects, but a lot of risks as well, as mentioned. As for Sweden, this is 2015. 162,877 asylum seekers, around 35,000 unaccompanied minors. Several new laws was presented the 24th of November, which I mentioned earlier. And this day marks the day Sweden turned, because the 3rd of September, when Viktor went to Brussels and said those things, the Swedish leader, Stefan Löfven, still was very, very fond of the generous, open asylum politics. He was very fond of hosting refugees, and he tried to send that signal as well. Sweden will not turn in this matter. And the 6th of September, he held a famous speech, which is now oftenly quoted in central Stockholm, where he openly said that Sweden will not participate in any borders for Europe. Sweden will host refugees. He actually stood in front of a refugee welcome banner. And 4 weeks later, what happened? Well, too many people actually came. And when too many people actually came, there were no houses. There were no places in the school, there were no health care, etc. Well, there was, but the risk was, within the near future, there wouldn't be. So 4 weeks later, the 4th of October, the migration minister, Morgan Johansson, he said that if this continues, we will have thousands without houses, thousands that has nowhere to go, nowhere to live. So they tried to find unity within the Swedish parliament. And to make a long story short, the long story is in my book, but to make it short, by the 24th of November, to put it as simple as possible, they felt they had to do it. They had to turn around 180 and try as good as they can to minimize the number of asylum applicants to Sweden. So if 3rd of September was the turning point for Europe, I would say the 24th of November 2015 was the turning point for Sweden. And by the 4th of January, there was control of identification at the airport outside the Danish capital, Copenhagen. And it was Swedish controls, and the reason they was there was because if you come to Sweden and if you come and you see a police or another officer and they want to check your identification and they say, well, you don't have a legit identification, which people doesn't have if they come from Somalia or Eritrea or Afghanistan, for example, in most cases anyway. So, but if they would be in Sweden, those type of controls, you could just say that, well, I want to seek asylum. It's my human right to seek asylum here. I'm on Swedish ground. I can do this, and you could. So they put it in Denmark. So when the refugees came to the controls, and they didn't have a proper identification, but our measurements, which is quite high standard, they couldn't enter to Sweden. They couldn't continue to Sweden. And if you can't continue to Sweden, you can't seek asylum in Sweden. And so it dropped. From 163,000 2015 to 28,000 from 163,000 2015 to 28,000 the next year. And the problem, because I can understand it. I can understand this in a way. You had a very serious situation during the fall of 2015. There were a lot of asylum seekers. You couldn't see the end of it. You didn't know how it would be. And you like your society as it is. You don't want people to have a less health care, or you don't want children to have worse school, etc. And they saw those risks, and those risks were there. They were there. So what they did was, they changed rules. They had these controls, which made people turn around, and they couldn't enter Sweden. But the risks of this, the risks of turning around, the risks of saying, we can't handle this, the risks of this is you change the perspective from their breathing space to our breathing space. And when you change that perspective, it's very hard to go back. And that is for Europe as well as for Sweden. And now, 2 years later, there's no back going in sight. We are still wandering this way, feeling as we can't handle this. Though we had 28,000 applicants last year, though there will be like 21,000 applicants this year, but the politics of this debate, as of now, it's the very same as it was when there came too many in the fall of 2015. And this is the danger of turning around, because when we turn our backs against the very people in need of protection, it's kind of hard to remember then afterwards that those people are still in need of protection. They're just not here anymore, and they're not on the way anymore. They're trapped. They're trapped in Turkey. They're trapped in Libya. They're trapped inside of Syria. They're trapped in Nigeria, in refugees camps in Kenya, outside of Somalia, etc., etc. But we don't see them on the way anymore. But I wouldn't say that Sweden has made I think it's a mistake to forget the humanity of the asylum politics, and I think it's a mistake to turn around the way we did, at least to keep it this way now when we have a whole other situation, when there aren't any large sums of people on the way. But we have, Sweden as well as Europe, we have hosted a lot of people during this year, and a lot of people will be here when they have got their asylum decisions, because they come from dangerous countries. They come from Iraq, they come from Syria, they come from Afghanistan, from Somalia, Eritrea. I think these are the main 5 countries of origin in Sweden. These are dangerous countries, so most of them will be granted protection in Sweden. And now, the main focus now should be, how do we handle this? Maybe it's 250,000 people during the years of 2014 and 2015. How do we handle these people? How can we do everything we possibly can to get those people into our society? That should be the main focus right now. But I can't say that it is the main focus of the debate right now. Not in Sweden and not in Europe as I hear it. I hear more talks about security issues related to refugees. I hear more talks about border protection related to refugees. So the very challenge is this. When we have related the asylum question, the refugee question, with how much we can handle as a society, it's really simple to forget that these are individuals with different reasons, they are different people, they deserve our respect, and now we have to remember that again. Because if we are afraid, if we see those people as security issues, it will be so much harder to integrate those people. And when we won't be able to integrate those people will have the blame for that. So, and then I would meet them as a criminal defense lawyer or something instead, because when you're isolated, that's not a good thing. It raises the risks for crimes, it raises the risk for narcotics, it raises the risk for other type of isolating behavior. And then there'll be subgroups in the society. And then we will say, well, this group, or these groups, they're not good for us. And then there will be racism. So that is not a good thing. So what we should focus on right now is to have the rules for work should be changed, in my opinion. The rules for housing should be changed, in my opinion. The rules for educating people who are newly arrived or has newly arrived here should be changed. All those things must be attacked with creativity and an openness to integrate those people so they can come into our society as fast as possible. Because if they don't, things will not be good. It won't be good for anyone. It won't be good for the future asylum system. It won't be good for the European common asylum system. But first and foremost, it won't be good for the individuals who came here to seek protection. They came to Sweden as one of the best countries in the world, and now we have to take that responsibility and be one of the best countries in the world for them. Thank you.